So I was a little hesitant to make this video because I've thought of myself as being excessively cranky lately, and I don't want people to see me as just being overly negative. I mean, I like things. Not much immediately comes to mind, but alright, if I'm being 100% honest, I haven't really been that negative lately, and let's take a look at my recent output of videos. I did that video on Netflix's Cowboy Bebop where I was cautiously optimistic about a second season of that show that's now never going to happen. I did the video on Netflix Mega Man where I was cautiously optimistic about the show's existence, despite valid concerns, especially considering what happened to the former. I did that video on Pokemon Legends Arceus, and maybe you could say I was a little too negative on that one. I don't agree with that, but at least I would understand that line of thinking. I did the video on Mega Man X-Dive, and that game's a scam, so I think it's reasonable to be angry at that. Then there was the Rurouni Kenshin Watsuki video, and there's a lot of words you can use to talk about that guy, and all of them are negative. And then there was the video I just recently did on Tales of Arise, and I really liked that game, and I liked Panama City Beach, where I filmed it, so forgive my indignance, but I have talked myself into getting a couple of minutes to be viscerally angry at a terrible video game that I am now going to talk about. Part 1, This Way to Science, Adventure. Before I get into hating on Robotics Notes Dash, first let me gush about the Science Adventure series. It's great. I got introduced to it via the Steins Gate anime many years ago, and it's still to this day one of my favorites. It's got excellent characters, an interesting plot, memorable moments, great payoffs. I love it. Essentially, all of the science adventure games are visual novels. You get introduced to a cast of quirky characters who are going about their everyday lives, at least until that meddling science starts to meddle and create an adventure for them. Now, the strength of each of these games is predicated entirely on those casts. You're going to be following these characters around for hours and hours and hours, getting their reactions to everything that goes on in the game, and everything that goes on in the game directly affects them, so you need to be interested in what those reactions are. Steins Gate does this beautifully. Now, of course, if you want to get the visual novel abridged, the anime is a perfectly serviceable way in which to experience that story, but I do recommend getting your hands on the game if you can, and the sequel, Steins Gate Zero, is also well worth the ride. And the reason why both of them are so good is because they check off two very simple boxes. They have interesting characters and an interesting story, and for a visual novel, that's all you really need. Everything else can just sort of tail along for the ride. The other games in the Science Adventure series also have this to varying degrees. Chaos Head, for example, I've never played Chaos Head, although I did see the anime for it eons ago, and I barely remember it. Although, it is interesting, the English translation of Chaos Head Noah is coming out in October, which is this month, if that gives you any indication of how long I've been sitting on this particular script.
Pause. Hey everybody, it is me in editing. So there's that fun little line I just said there about how it's coming out in October, and that's this month, and it is still technically this month, October, but you see that Chaos Head, Chaos Child game is out. It has been out since October the 7th, and it is the 26th. So yeah, it's out. I know it's out. This could have just been a text.
To be honest, I am actually quite interested in playing that English translation of Noah, but I have played Chaos Child, and I can tell you that it has an interesting plot with marginally interesting characters. They're not amazing, but I wouldn't go so far as to call them bad. And then you have Robotics Notes, which has the distinction of having uninteresting characters in an uninteresting plot. Oh goody, it's the worst of both worlds. Part 2, more like Robotics Notes. Alright, let me be fair. Robots are cool. Giant robots are cool. A show about a bunch of characters building a giant robot based off of their favorite anime is a pretty great concept. I really like that. With a few tweaks and the right characters, this could have been a keep your hands off Isoken level story about creation from passion. I love shit like that. And it could have been even better, especially considering that a lot of the science adventure series revolves around delusions and imagination with its main characters. The problem is that the characters of Robotics Notes are boring, one-note, corrugated cardboard standees. Let's meet them. First is Yashio Kaito. He's the main protagonist of Robotics Notes. We see the world of Tanegashima through his eyes. Kai likes video games. Oh, sorry, strike that. That's wrong. Kai likes video game. Singular. You see, Kai's entire worldview revolves around one video game, a robot fighting game called Kill Ballad. It's all he talks about, it's all he cares about. Anything that is said to him, he will relate it to this one video game. Even building a giant robot, yeah, he doesn't give a shit about that at all. Even after he's had his arc, he's still just like droning about this game. Like, he'll be like, yeah, I guess I'll pilot this giant robot, the most amazing thing a person could ever do, but I'm only doing that because I'm being forced to. I'd much rather be playing my video game, and sure, I suppose I'll save the world, as long as doing so is with the control scheme of my favorite video game. Next is Tsunomiya Akiho. She's the female lead and the will they won't they love interest character. She's also an idiot, which the game seems to conflate with likability. Every time you want to root for Akiho and her struggle to get this giant robot built, you're immediately pulled out of it by just how unfathomably stupid she is. Then we have Hidaka Subaru. He's a tsundere character. He's rude to the main characters, calls them idiots to their faces, and rightly points out the things that they do wrong. But underneath his rough exterior beats the heart of a sad weeb. You see, he secretly loves robots, building them, and he also wears his own customized Sentai suit, which I think is fantastic. More people in the real world should just do that. Next is Frau Kojiro. She is the pervert character, but she's more interesting than your everyday run-of-the-mill pervert because she is a girl. Whoa! Girls can be perverts too, boys. That's what the feminists want. Yeah, she may be an impossibly smart get-out-of-jail-free card for the main characters whenever they get stuck on anything, but she does that while making risque comments. What kind of risque comments, you may ask? Well, listen to track 4 on Nirvana's In Utero album, and that should sum things up nicely for you. And last, and possibly least pending your viewpoint, Daitoko Juna rounds out the cast. She is a fraidy cat. She has more phobias than red blood cells, and it's endearing at first in a sort of, oh honey, kind of way, but it starts to get grating fast, because every single thing that is said to her, no matter how banal, is reacted to with the same drawn-out, annoying, uncertain groan. I'll give you an example. Like I said, it could be the most just innocuous nonsense they could be talking to her about. They'll be like, Jun-chan, o genki desu ka? Every time. Chris, you should really be nicer to people with social anxieties. Fuck you! I'm not saying it's bad that she has social anxieties. I am sympathetic to people who have anxiety. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying the moaning thing is annoying. I would be put off if somebody in real life did that. You can be understanding and irritated at the same time. Now, these characters, while one note, could work if the story they were involved in were a little more interesting. Robotics notes does get interesting later in the game, but the first, I would say almost 2/3, are just a slice-of-life school story. The giant robot is being built, but it's happening in the background, and it's being done solely by Akiho. Kai, the main character, he's just doesn't give a shit. Like, he can barely be arsed to comment on what's going on, and that's a huge problem, because if the main character of a story isn't invested in the story, why would I be? Imagine if the other games in the Science Adventure series did that. Like if in Steins Gate, when the bananas turned to gelatin, Rintaro was just like, yeah, that's interesting, but I think I'm just gonna keep tossing this baseball up to myself. Jesus, if I had more hand-eye coordination, I would be a lot like Rintaro, because he's not coordinated at all. I have to stare this thing into my hand to make sure I catch it. Oh my god. I had lines here, but fuck that. It's so cool. Son of a bitch. That worked great. That's great. I'm not doing another take of that. That was harrowing. Or if in Chaos Child, Takuru is like, yeah, those murders sure are unfortunate. I'm really upset about this new generation madness thing, but I'm just gonna keep drinking this Dr. Pepper. For the next 46 hours. I probably should have had this be the Steins Gate segment. I can tell you, you'd be pretty fucking bored if you were the player. And when Robotics Notes does start to get wild, as these games inevitably all do, it's hard to drum up any interest because you've been watching what equates to a human sleeping pill, reacting to everything going on with as much enthusiasm as one would show for merging onto the highway. So after all that, I wasn't necessarily jazzed to play the sequel Robotics Notes Dash, but it came as a part of a bundle when I bought the original game, and I am a sucker for a science adventure, so I played the sequel, and, well, Part 3, Dash, to the uninstall button. Alright, so let's say that you have a story with uninteresting characters, and you're making a sequel but you don't want to improve them at all. What's the next best thing you can do? Well, you could always just add new characters. Maybe giving them better foils to bounce off of will make the original characters better by proxy. Robotics Notes tries to do this by adding the worst character from Steins Gate. Ashida Itaru is one of the two things that I warn people about whenever I recommend Steins Gate to them, and if you want that disclaimer, here it is. The main character sexually assaults one of his friends later in the story. It's pretty uncomfortable and kind of transphobic. It is explained in context, but it can be tough to sit through if you're not expecting it. The other thing is, there's an unrelenting pervert character who is always at a 10 with his nonsense. If it makes you feel any better, he's always rebuked. He's at least in the same age range as the people he's perving on, and he actually gets some really good character development later in the story. So if you're good to go with those two things, I highly recommend Steins Gate. It's great. Watch it. That said, Daru's addition to Robotics Notes is completely baffling to me. As a side character, he's essentially useless because he's a pervert character, and the pervert role is already being filled up by Frau. We don't need another pervert, and even if we did it have to be a guy who's so much older than the other characters? Like, at least in Steins Gate, Daru is in the 18 to 22 range, and so are his targets. But in Robotics Notes Dash, Daru is 29 years old, and the characters in the Robot Club are between the ages of 17 and 19? And the one that he pervs on the most frequently is the one who's actually in her 20s, but has the mind and body of a 14-year-old, so that's great. Now, this would be bad if he were a side character, but at least as a side character, he wouldn't matter. We could ignore him a little more easily, but that's not the case. He's not a side character in Robotics Notes Dash, he's the titular character. That's right, dash isn't just a fun little verb, dash is a chemical compound made up of Daru, super hacker. Naturally, with him as the protagonist, we get his reactions to everything that goes on in the game, and because the bad writing requires every single one of these reactions relate to his single defining character trait, everything with him is an absolute chore to sit through. As I watched this bizarre man leer at children 10 years his junior, I couldn't help but just think of how low this is. One thing I will praise the original Robotics Notes for is that the villain was a genuine bastard who you wanted to see stopped. Let's talk about him for his appearance in Robotics Notes Dash. The guy who wanted to take over the world by having hospitality robots turn on the people who relied on them for care and were too sick or injured to fight back. The guy who abandoned a little girl in cold sleep so that he could go hide report of a conspiracy theory.html in the most ludicrous scavenger hunt ever devised. Yeah, that guy who lied to said little girl's parents saying that she disappeared when he was the one who kidnapped her. Yeah, that guy. Well, what's his dastardly plan now that he's returned? Well, now he's screwing with everyone's cell phones. Overlays have been placed to make all of the girls look like they're wearing bikinis. Whoa, how embarrassing. Especially considering they live on a summery vacation beach island, and they're swimming all the fucking time. Oh, God. Wait a minute. Hold on. The villain's bad guy plan is making lurid Instagram filters? That's a bit of a step down from world domination, eh, Kimijima? Instead of holding the world hostage, he's going to force the girls to play water balloon toss with him. What a mastermind. Especially considering he's an AI program now and has no physical body with which to interact with the waking world. The game's plot is really just an excuse to put the girls in skimpy outfits, like, ooh, bloomers, or ooh, bathing suits, or oh, idol outfits, oh, scandalous. And of course, because one of our main characters is a pervert, and we're in his POV, where do you think the camera goes during all of this? If you guessed the boobs, congratulations. You're a little too sophisticated for Robotics Notes Dash. Think a little further south. Now go straight to jail. This game is a disaster. It shouldn't have never been made, and the people responsible for making it should be ashamed of themselves. Part 4. Conclusion. I've made it a point in all of the science adventure VNs I've played to get all of the endings. They might not all be canon, but they lead to the true ending, which is. And I don't know, there's just something rewarding about seeing the resolution to each character's individual arc. I even did this for Robotics Notes, which is a game I don't really care for. I could not stomach doing that for Robotics Notes Dash. Now, it's pretty obtuse how you obtain a lot of these endings in the first place, but even going through that, because you could always just look up a walkthrough on how to get it and get it pretty quickly, but I just, the prospect of more Daru dialogue just didn't sit well with me. I didn't want to put up with it. I got the first ending that the game just gives you, and I called it from there. I just looked the other ones up on Google. That's good enough for me, no more. Thank you. Funny enough, the ending that I did get was for the girl who's actually in her 20s, but has the mind and body of a 14-year-old. And guess what it is? You'll never guess, because it's fucking bananas. Her ending is that she switches between a child and adult body every time she hiccups. And she uses this as an opportunity to get close to Kai, whom she now has a crush on. That's right, the two characters who have basically said at multiple avenues that they are a older brother, little sister relationship. Yeah, that's not it anymore. Now she's in love, and she wants to use the adult body to trick him into thinking that she's some famous idol, and they can go on a date together, and they can eat ice cream together so they can swap spit, and she wants him to kiss her. Even though he has said that he has taken on a protector role of her. Don't be too upset about this, though. I mean, it's only for one day. They're only going to go on one date. She's going to get her kiss, and then she's going to go back to her childlike little sister self forever. Because that's the role she has to be in. Kai needs to be free up for his actual love interest character, because they've been still in a will they, won't they mentality throughout this game, even though they ended the previous one kissing each other on an abandoned airport runway, essentially confirming themselves as a couple. Nope, that's gone now. They need to come together again at the end of this game, and we can't have our little girl character also be a homewrecker. This game is just rotten. But even still, I am excited for the Chaos Head Noah translation that's coming out this month.
Pause.
I am still excited for it. I still love the Science Adventure series. Sure, Steins Gate does a lot of heavy lifting there, especially with Robotics Notes in its sequel really dragging down the weight. But I'm still into it, and you know what? If anonymous code ever gets localized, which I assume it will, I'm going to be into that too. So those were my thoughts on Robotics Notes Dash. That's, I think I've said everything I needed to say. If you liked this video, prove it. Like, comment, subscribe to the channel. L's and the D will take you to my social medias, Patreon, comic and novels. I think there's other stuff there. If there is, I'll link it. I work really hard on them, so yeah, check those out. Support me if you can, love me if you must, and have a great rest of your day.